So we'll be editing the recording, okay, before we upload. Hari?
Yes, sir. RMN will do it.
Yeah, the initial, 5-10 minutes we need to cut because we don't require it.
Okay, sir. I will inform RMN.
Yeah, yeah. Who is going to introduce the guests?
Sir, Mehak will be giving the introduction. So you'll join in a minute.
Who?
Mehak.
Okay.
Uh, Hello, Dr. Reddy. Hi, Vishnu have joined.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, Vishnu, you joined. Thank you. And what about Badri?
You haven't received the video from him.
No, I haven't received any video from him.
He hasn't informed me anything. So, I mean,
Okay. We will start in another 5+ minutes.
huh?
We will start it in another 5+ minutes.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
You're recording it, right?
Yes. If you wish, we won't be uploading it.
Yeah, yeah.
As a policy, we record the event, and if you have any issues, we will not be uploading it in YouTube.
So anyway, it's still going. The recording is still going on, right?
No, we will be editing this part.
Okay.
Exactly from the
In the
time of.
beginning, and the views are personal.
Yes, absolutely.
Has the classes started online? Sorry, offline.
Yes, for all the 3-year students, offline classes started from 17th of February.
All right. Okay.
That is in the Delhi University.
Initially, when you sent the invite, I thought it would be offline.
Okay.
It would be good to actually start doing face-to-face meetings again.
Yes. Yes. So can I call Dr. Badri and check with him? Would he be able to take the call?
Just give me 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, please display the poster meanwhile, Harry.
Hi. Do you want to start now?
Yeah. Yes, we are going to.
Okay. So we can start now if you want.
Yes, we will be starting. Yes, Mahek. Mahek.
Yes, sir, I'm starting.
Yeah, please start with the program.
Yes, sir.
I think Dr. Badri would not be able to join. Am I right?
I have a feeling he won't be joining.
There is no reply on WhatsApp also. He seems to be traveling. That's okay. We will try to catch him next time. Yes, Mahek, please go ahead with the introduction of all the guests.
Right, sir. I'll introduce all the three guests.
Yes.
A very good morning to one and all present here. I welcome you all to the Symposium of Trade Policy in India, Trends, Strategies and Prospects. Today, We have among us three esteemed guests, Dr. Badrinarayan Gopalakrishnan, Shri Vishnu Dasgupta, and Ms. Sugandha Huria. Before I share about our honored speakers, I'd like to introduce our economics department and the association. The economics department of Sri Venkateswara College is one of the most highly regarded academic units in the University of Delhi and has not only produced a dynamic set of alumni but has also seen great academicians and scholars grace the corridors of the college as professors. Apart from academics, the department's day-to-day functioning as an administrative and extracurricular unit is handled by the Economics Association. The Economics Association of Sri Venkateswara College is a group of dynamic individuals committed to ensuring the smooth functioning of departmental operations, activities, and events. Managed by the students of the economics department, under the purview of the teaching faculty, it oversees a wide range of spheres from the conduction of academic seminars and alumni sessions to the hosting of inter-college competitions. To smoothen functioning, the association has a highly organized structure spread across departments ranging from marketing to sponsorship, each led by secretaries who are in turn supervised by the senior core council comprising of final year students. The association also organizes the annual fest of the economics department, Bliss Point, a well-regarded event in the undergraduate circuit. I'd now like to introduce our guest speakers. Our first guest speaker, Dr. Badrinarayan Gopalakrishnan Sir, is an applied economist with 20 years experience and expertise in economic modeling, data science, and in many such areas such as international trade, energy, agriculture, industry and health, economic impact of new technologies like drones, robotics, 3D printing, nanotechnologies, cloud computing, blockchain, etc. Sir formerly led the development of a complex economic database of over 140 countries in the world. He has also been a consultant with McKinsey, UN, World Bank, ADB, and NIFT. It would have been an honor to have you here with us today, sir. Our second speaker, Dr. Vishnu Dasgupta, sir, is a researcher in economics and public policy with 7 years plus experience, who has worked in areas of international trade policy, development economics, and industrial policy. He is currently engaged as an associate in the commerce and industry vertical of NITI Aayog. Thank you for taking the time and being here with us today, sir.
Just one clarification. I don't have a doctorate. I'm just Vishnu. I don't have a doctorate. Just want to clarify that.
Right, sir. Sorry.
Not a problem. I just want to clarify. I don't have a doctorate.
Yes, sir. Our third speaker, Ms. Sugandha Huria, is an assistant professor with the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. It gives me immense pleasure to share with you all that she has been a former assistant professor at the economics department, Sri Venkateswara College. Thank you for being here with us today, ma'am. I'd now like to invite our teacher in charge, Dr. Brahma Reddy sir, who is also the moderator for this symposium, to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Mahek, for that wonderful introduction of all our distinguished guests. A very good morning and warm welcome to all our guests and the students. The topic that we have chosen is trade policy in India, trends, strategies, and prospects. We have three distinguished speakers. Already, Mr. Vishnu has joined with us. Dr. Badrinarayan has been traveling. In fact, he communicated to me that he would send a video that he wanted to record yesterday night, but I could not receive the video yet. It means he is too busy, therefore he could not send the video, but we still wait and to join him. And Sugandha would join with us around 30 minutes past 10 o'clock. She is currently engaged in a classroom session with MBA students at IIFT. With the topic that we have chosen, trade policy, as some of you are aware, what international trade means, basically exports of goods and services. This topic we have chosen keeping in mind that Government of India is going to announce a new trade policy very soon. In fact, the previous trade policy that the government has announced was in 2015, and that trade policy supposed to be over by 2020, but due to the pandemic, the government has extended the 2015 policy till date, and we are expecting a new trade policy maybe within 6 to 9 months time after considering all the relevant factors. The foreign trade policy, if you see the foreign trade policy of India, so we have something called the Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992. Post the economic liberalization, government has enacted an act, that is Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992. Under this act, the government of India announces a new trade policy once in every 5 years. As I already mentioned, the present policy is of the 2015-20, which is extended till date. When the new trade policy was announced in 2015, our Honorable PM said that he wished to increase India's share of global trade from 2.1% to 3.5% and double the India's exports by to $900 billion. This was the target set at the announcement at the time of the new trade policy that was released by the government of India. If you see India's trade policy since 1950, there has been massive changes, structural shifts in the policy regime. And in fact, some of the researchers classify India's foreign trade policy into various phases, beginning from 1950 to 1976, the first phase having 25 years. And thereafter from 1976 to 1991, that is another, about 15 years. And post-liberalization, that is phase 3, beginning from 1991 to 2002, and phase 4 from 2002-3 to 14-15, and the new phase 5, began in 2014-15. If you look back, India's volume of trade, so you would be surprised to know that our volume of trade was too small. For example, in 1950-51, in absolute terms, India's imports were just about $1.2 billion. And India's exports were 1.2 billion. So we just had about 4 million of balance of trade deficit or trade deficit. Today, India's trade, if you see both ways, imports and exports and imports, it would cross $1 trillion. There has been a phenomenal growth in India's trade. Our speaker, Mr. Vishnu Dasgupta, is going to review the entire trade policy and examine the trends and suggest what is that we have to do to improve India's trade position at a global level. And our second speaker, Sugandha, she is going to examine the global trends, the emerging trends in terms of bilateral trade agreements, regional trading agreements, the emerging trends in global trade. With this, my introductory remarks, I now welcome our first speaker, Mr. Vishnu Dasgupta, who is a specialist in trade, related matters, to give his full presentation. Sir, now the floor is yours, and you can take, as much time as you want, maybe 40 minutes for your full presentation, followed by that discussion and questions and answers with the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy, for your introductory remarks. So basically, in my presentation, I'll just be sharing my screen. You can see my presentation.
Yes, it's starting, but we haven't. Yes, we can see.
You can see.
Yes.
So basically, I've chosen this topic, doubling of exports, the impact on the Indian economy. This incidentally was the first study which Dr. Badri and I had worked together. Before I'd like to begin, hold on just 1 minute, please. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can.
You can hear me clearly?
Yes,
Okay, so my screen can still be seen?
yes.
Okay, sorry for that. So this is a presentation title which we are showing, doubling of exports impact on Indian economy. This incidentally was the first project Dr. Badri and I had worked together. Um, and I would like to mention here that the views presented are personal. So basically, this is an introduction which we're giving. So excluding this current year, the India's exports have been relatively stagnant for some time now. And the Honorable Prime Minister had given a target for doubling the exports. How can we do it? We are looking at what may be the changing geopolitical situation, some schemes such as PLI, logistics, and FCA, and possibly also an increase in total factor productivity growth. So this exercise, as you see, was to examine the impact of the economy of export share of India was doubled. We actually used the GTAP model to analyze this. We considered different scenarios, and across most scenarios, it was found that productivity gains has the largest impact. And from this, we conclude that the policy measures to accelerate productivity growth should be given the main focus. So before I begin with the actual presentation, just want to present some facts. Although the data is only till 2020, you can see that China's current account surplus is actually more than India's total merchandise exports. Even though their current account surplus fell in 2018, so we have a way to go. Now, these are the top exported products for both India and China at the most aggregate level. And for India, you can say our top exports are fuels and gems and jewelry, whereas for China, it's machinery and electrical parts. Now, the interesting fact is what China's exports, machinery and electrical parts, it represents, it is among the top two traded products worldwide. So in that sense, China's top exports mirror closely what is driving global exports than India's. Here we have just categorized India's top exports at the HS6 digit level, and we have what I've done is I've put the industry classification, the product type, and the exported value, just to help the reader understand under which industry the product falls and what type of product it is. Is it an intermediate? Is it an intermediate product, final product, capital good, etc. So as you can see, some of our products are for final consumption, some are intermediate consumption. Many of them fall in agriculture, many of them fall under mining, quarrying, refinery. You also have products falling under the construction industry, many products falling under textiles, apparel, shoes, and gems and jewelry. You also have products falling under the hardware industry, IT hardware. Then you also have products which fall broadly under the transportation and manufacturing industry. Also, you have pharmaceutical products. Now, when we turn to China, just to have a measure of comparison, we can see that there is some amount of difference between India and China, as in the industries are different, and the number of products under each industries are also different. China also, some of the broad categorization between India and China appear similar, but the products that are being exported, their values and the classification is a bit different compared to India, as can be seen in this slide and also this slide, where you can see that I had mentioned earlier that capital goods, the machinery and electrical machinery, electrical products are among the largest exported products of China. And you can see that here, compared to India, their IT hardware exports are much more. Other exports in the manufacturing industry are also much more. Lithium ion accumulators is something China is increasing its exports on. And they are also a large bicycle exporter. So Dr. Reddy was telling that all of you are third year undergrad students. So I'm just we have done a reveal comparative advantage here between India and China for both India's top 25 products and then China's top 25 products to see where each country stands with respect to each other's top exports. It can be seen that compared like in the products where India has a high reveal comparative advantage, that is more than one. In most cases, China is not there except for 851712 telephones for cellular networks. It is among the top exported products for China. So here we can see that. Again, same thing is noticed. It's another area where China also has high RCA vis-a-vis high RCA in the top exporter product to India is motorcycles. Although compared to India, China's RCA is quite small. We have over the time developed a large capacity in motorcycle products. Turning to China, we can see that India's RCA in China's top 25 exports are also low. So basically what we are seeing is there is no similarity between the export portfolio of India and China. Whereas China, some of the and India's RCA in China's products is China and some of China's top exports is also low, as in uh, India's exports are also lower, and these are some of the top traded products which India and these markets, these industries is also when India is looking to expand its horizons through various measures. I'm just during the same trend. Another one area where India has a high RCA compared to China is 271019. Oil and medium oils and preparations, basically refined oil. So we have good oil refinery capacities. And here India's RCA, as you can see, is quite high, 3.89%. RCA being the real comparative advantage. So basically, I'm just summarizing what I have showed before. The only commonality between India and China among China's top 25 exports is refined oils. India's exports comprises of food products, mineral fuels, textiles, apparel, and machinery, electrical machinery, but not to that large extent. China's majority export is electrical products, equipment, and machinery. This is actually in line with the global trend. Other export items are, of course, textiles, apparel, mineral fuels, etc. We have at least at face value a lack of competitiveness in exports of electrical equipment and machinery. And in terms of product type, China exports a large amount of capital goods compared to India. And there is a divergence in exports of both India and China. But China's export portfolio is more closely aligned to global trend than India. So what we had summarized from this was how India can increase its production and exports of electrical products and machinery, and also its traditional exports, to not ignore them, how they can also be increased. So this is what we just briefly summarized from those tables. This is something which is publicly available, so you people can, the interested students can read. There is something called a Commission on Growth and Development, which was formed by the World Bank. They had released a report, and they had tried to identify the common themes that categorized high and sustained growth. High and sustained growth is economies have grown at 7% or more for a sustained period. 25 years is what they identified. And sustained growth has many positive benefits, including poverty reduction, productive employment, education, health, and the opportunity to be creative. So the report identified certain distinctive characteristics of high growth economies and also suggested how they may be emulated. These are some of the economies which they said. And these are some commonalities which they had. Five commonalities. They could maintain macroeconomic stability, high rates of savings and investment. Markets allocated the resources. They grew. They exported. They grew via exports. And finally, they had credited, committed, and capable government. So, in one sense, you can say there was a policy consistency and policy certainty that fostered macroeconomic stability, that led to high savings and investments, and not too much interference in the market, allowed the market to allocate resources, and this led to high exports, and which further led to growth. So I'm just summarizing some key points which they said with respect to export promotion and industrial policy. The commission was very clear. It was saying, it mentioned that the role of exports in promoting sustained growth is not disputed. What there was no consensus on is how the export promotion may be done. They allowed for scope for government in encouraging exports, and what they had suggested that the government efforts, if undertaken, can be temporary, critically evaluated, and should also. It was also suggested that the policies should be industry sector agnostic, allowing the market to identify opportunities. And supportive measures were also needed, such as education, infrastructure, responsive regulation, etc. Now, turning back to something, I had mentioned that our exports is the export portfolio is not similar to world. However, our trend with world exports is similar, but our export portfolio is not similar. So we follow the same pattern. World exports is given on the left-hand axis. India's exports is given in the right-hand axis. We can see that although the trend is similar, but the type of products we export is not similar. This the same is with service exports. The world side, and although the export trend is in sync with global trends, the products which we export globally is not that similar. Now, turning to the model, we use the GTAP model to run the simulations, and I mean, this summarizes the GTAP model. It's a bit complicated, but let me help you understand. So think of ignore rest of the world for now. Think of all of this as a single economy. You have a regional household that produces and consumes. So the regional household it purchases from product markets. It and then it sells its services to the firms. The firms pay the regional household for the factor payments. The taxes are used on the government, and here the firms trade within each other also. So the firms trade within each other, domestic intermediates and intermediate and imported intermediates, and the regional household is also connected with the rest of the world. So one way to look at it is, if you recall your macroeconomics, the circular model of the economy. So in one sense, this may be similar to that, but this describes the model and the interlinkages between the different factors to help you understand what may be driving the changes in the economy. So the explanation here is to help you understand how it is. So the consumers have a consumption function that allocates between the resources. The firms allow for intrastate industry and production through input-output linkages. Input-output in this sense are the harmonized input-output tables across all the countries identified in GTAP. There is also a government sector which allows for taxes and expenditures to affect all the sectors. The rest of the world allows for a bilateral trade, and it connects to the overall domestic demand and foreign production. There's a global bank. This has been put in place to help in allowing for global savings and investment flows to adjust to each other. And one another thing is the model has the Armington hypothesis in place. that allows for that helps in better understanding the impact of trade on the domestic economy. This model was actually quite, this model is a part of family of models called the computable general equilibrium models that allows to understand the impact on the economy due to policy measures. This is one type of model. The CG models were used and are still used extensively in trade. And the CG models were actually used to help understand the possible impact of trade liberalization during the Uruguay round of the GATT that led to the formation of the WTO. So this is a more detailed version of the model which I had shared before. I won't get too much into this. So this is how the table, this is how the data is constructed. You have harmonized input-output tables that are fitted with international data sets to get linked data sets, which are then assembled to create the GTAB database. This is the same thing where the data is collected from different countries. So coming now to the study itself. So 4 scenarios were identified. So basically in these type of models, you have to create situations or scenarios or simulations wherein you explore a question, what if something happens? What if total productivity is increased? Or what if some scheme is introduced? What may be the impact of it in the entire economy? So you have to devise some scenarios which can then be imputed in the model, and then there are something called shocks, and then the model is shocked. The model is shocked, and this helps in understanding the impact. So basically, it is assumed that the model is in equilibrium before certain policy happens, and that policy is the change in the model. And then post the implementation of the policy, how will the economy look like? So there are 4 different scenarios which we looked at. The first one is the exports double purely on the strength of the total factor productivity. Think of it as increasing in ease of doing business, reducing barriers to trade, more efficient allocation of resources in the economy. All of this may be driving total factor productivity. In addition to that, something called the production linked incentive schemes, which all of you may have been following, that has also been implemented. The production linked incentive schemes, PLI for short, basically are production linked financial incentives that are given to companies if they meet certain production targets in selected industries. So initially 13 different schemes were organized, were released across different sectors, including pharmaceuticals, electrical machinery, mobile phone manufacturing, textiles, white goods, food processing. So that is there. And then that is the second scenario. The third one is in addition to TFP, the FTAs that have been done with all that we are negotiating with Australia, UK, EU, and UAE are also completed. Among these, we have already completed FTAs with Australia and UAE, whereas UK and EU are being negotiated. Now, in the fourth scenario, we are saying that in addition to the increase in TFP, the logistic costs have also fallen. So these are the 4 scenarios which we have put to help understand what will be their impact on the economy and the export share. These are the results. Now, these are the 4 scenarios which we have identified. In the first scenario, the GDP increases by 112%. In terms of dollar change, it's $295 billion. Apart from the second scenario is where apart from increasing TFP, the PLI scheme is also implemented. We can see that the increase in GDP is 118%. In the third one, apart from TFP, FTAs are also FTAs have also been done. The percentage increase of GDP is 107%. The fourth one is apart from TFP, there are also logistical improvements. We can see that the GDP increases by 110%. Now, bear in mind, these are just simulations. This just shows the potential direction of the impact. Is something which I would like to bear in mind, and this impact will be spread over time. It won't happen immediately, it will happen over a period of time. So I would like you people to bear that in mind as you read the numbers. Now coming to investment, private consumption, government consumption and employment. In the four scenarios, we can see that investment increases the most when a PLI has been done. This is because under the PLI scheme, companies have to be committed to putting a certain amount of investment, meeting a minimum investment threshold. So that may be driving this. Export share increasing by TFP is 113%, the investments. Private consumption is 97%. Government consumptions increases a lot because bear in mind the government of India undertakes various welfare schemes and measures. And there may be more taxes that may be coming because of increase in exports. And this may be driving the government consumption. Employment also receives a boost across all the four scenarios. So in so we can see that basically there is a positive movement in all of the four scenarios, and the largest is when both export share increases and the PLI is fully implemented, showing that that may be because the PLI comes with meeting certain investment thresholds which a company has. PLI that may be driving the investment also. So basically across all the four indicators which we have analyzed here, investment, private consumption, government consumption and employment, there is positive benefits. Now coming to imports. Imports are also increasing in all of these scenarios. Now bear in mind, the reason imports are increasing is most of global trade is happening in intermediates, and most countries do not produce everything. I mean, there are, yeah, most countries do not produce everything. Even China imports a lot. It imports components which are then assembled in China. So imports will increase. This increase in imports is driven by an increase in both an increase in exports and increasing domestic demand. So your manufacturing base is increasing, your exports are increasing, and there's a need for more intermediates. So across all the four scenarios, the imports are also increasing. And that is something which we are seeing here. And given that globally most international trade is in intermediates, most of the imports that are being imported will probably also be intermediates, meaning that they will be imported, value addition is done, and then they are either exported or used for domestic consumption. Now this is the impact across. So basically the model allows for differentiation in labor categories. So you have 5 different types of labors: agriculture, low scale, clerks. So you can see that this is the base. This right here is the base. These are all the 4 scenarios. So you can see that across all the 4 scenarios, across all the 5 categories, the employment share employment is increasing. The largest is probably in agriculture and low skilled, because you're increasing the manufacturing base, you're decreasing logistic costs, and your exports are also increasing. So this is creating demand for many agriculture and low skilled employees to join the workforce, expand the production, and that is driving them. Managers are also seeing an increase. Some of this maybe so. Basically, there is a demand for more people to manage the industries, and that may also be driving it. And there is also an increase in the other categories as well. So broadly, what we're seeing is there's a positive impact in both total employment and also employment by categories. Now, this graph is a bit complicated, but please bear in mind the GTAP sector has the GTAP model has 65 sectors, and that same is being categorized here. Basically, if I were to summarize, I would say that the impact on exports is positive and it is spread across all the industries, all the 65 GTAP sectors. And the same is being shown here. If you just eyeball it, you can see that this is the base. These are all the four scenarios. And we can see that across all the four scenarios, the shares are visibly increasing. There is an expansion in each and every color. So we can see that the impact is a lot. Impact exists positively across all the sectors identified. This is again with imports. We can see there is an increase in imports across all the categories, and it's not just restricted to one or few categories. Let me just summarize what the changes in exports and imports are. So vis-a-vis the baseline figures. So this is the baseline. So the initial equilibrium may be called as the baseline, and then the change between baseline and all the four scenarios are identified. So the manufacturing industries benefit. This is both due to expansion in exports and increase in TFP. And there is both an increase in the size and diversification of exports. Now, although imports have increased, imports have not increased as much as exports. And this is because domestically the manufacturing and production base is increasing. So although imports are increasing, they're not increasing the same tune as exports. This is the percentage change in manufacturing across all the different scenarios. So some of these are labor intensive industries like textile, apparel, leather. Some of these are capital intensive like petroleum, pharmaceuticals, oil and steel, electronics, electrical manufacturing, machines, auto. Some of them are R&D incentive like pharmaceuticals. So we can see that across all the I think 47, 45 or 46 manufacturing, but not I think 2025 manufacturing sectors, we can see that there is an increase. Although the thing is, although there is an increase, the increase is not even. This is because of the different shares these industries occupy in the economy. These shares are calculated through the input-output tables and equations categorizing the relationship in the entire economy, both within each other and also with respect to final consumption. And that explains the divergence in performance. But ultimately, there is a positive benefit, and in most cases, the benefit is more than 100%. So over a period of time, we can see that there will be a positive benefit on the economy with a focus on exports. I'm just summarizing what I showed in the previous slide. Apparel gains are the most under the FTA scenario. This is because we export a lot of apparel products, including to the EU, and that may be driving this. There is growth across manufacturing. So basically what we're seeing is any policy measure that boosts productivity will have a positive impact. Electronics and electrical equipment shows the highest jump. So that would be electronics and electrical equipment. This shows the highest jump. That shows that the PLI may have a positive benefit on these industries. Both of them are part of the PLI. Pharmaceuticals, steel and auto, again, they are part of PLI. So we can see that they have the highest jump. So the PLI may have a positive impact. Basically what we're seeing is productivity lies at the heart of any growth spur. And the policy measure should be in addition to boosting productivity growth. This is with respect to services. Again, we are seeing a similar picture. So basically, there's a growth across all the services industry. Given that India is primarily services focused, since services occupy a large section of the economy, we can see there's a positive growth in services. the growth in shipping is the highest in scenario 4. If you recall, scenario 4 is with respect to a decrease in logistics costs. So you can see that that impacts the shipping industry the most. Like compared to all the 4 scenarios, in scenario 4, where the logistics cost decreases, we can see that shipping has there's a positive impact in shipping. Here I'm just summarizing what happens with respect to the change in services. So it benefits the most when the PLI is implemented, because the PLI also has something with respect to the pension benefits from the decreased logistics cost. And increase in services broadly due to increasing imports from increasing income from higher exports and growth of manufacturing. There is a second degree impact on services. Now what we're saying is that the impact of FTAs is solely due to zero tariffs. So only a decrease in tariffs is driving the impact of FTAs. Here we look at the agriculture sector. So we're looking at the agriculture and mining sector in total. So there is a positive impact here also, although the impact may not be that. So what we are saying is the agriculture industry showcases the lowest growth. Now the thing is, in the model, resources like land are fixed, and since agriculture needs land, this may be something that may be driving the results. And driven by manufacturing and services. Now, FTAs may not be having that much of high impact on the agriculture industry, possibly due to standards in export markets. And scenario 2 showcases the highest growth, so that shows. So this is a breakdown of the export baskets for your benefit. Again, I mean, it's a bit clustered, but it shows that there is an increase. The same with imports, albeit to a lesser degree. Now the share of EU has increased across all the 4 scenarios, and it is one of the largest export destination of India. So that shows that an FTA with EU is needed, but even without an FTA, productivity increases can lead to exports. So the increases in imports I had mentioned before is possibly driven by an increase in demand for intermediates. And for better or for worse, China continues to be a major source. Countries are looking to diversify from China. So if that is incorporated in the model, the results will probably be different. This is the output basket. I think, again, we can see that there's an increase up in the total and each industry across all the 4 scenarios. So let me just summarize and then open it up to questions. So measures to increase productivity will have the highest impact on GDP, exports, investment, and employment. Other measures like the ones which were analyzed here, or which can be done on top of productivity increasing measures to promote further growth. And with increases in productivity, our export basket will also become more diversified. And finally, export growth and import growth are linked. So that shows that there's a need for rationalizing the export-import policy of India to reduce the trade costs. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you found the presentation useful. I will end here. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vishnu Dasgupta, for a very comprehensive presentation, for sharing your latest research. I would request you to be, available. Can we complete the other presentation also by Sugandha? Do you have time?
How long will that take? I'm sorry.
I think she would take about 10 minutes.
Yeah, then I'll be available. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'll just.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she just told me that she is going to join. Her class is just completed.
I hope you found the presentation useful.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is the latest study by NITI Aayog.
No, this is our independent study. So like
Independent
we
study.
did it together, but it is an independent study. It was one of the first ones which Dr. Badri and I did when after he had joined.
Okay.
We use the GTAP model. I did not focus too much on the technicalities of the model, but just explain the results. I hope the students understood what we were looking at.
Yeah, basically, keeping in mind the PM's target of doubling exports by 2025, you try to build under various scenarios how we reach that target. If
Yeah,
correctly.
that is in summary is what we did. So the impact will be spread out over time. Something that should be kept in mind when you are doing all of this.
Yeah.
So it's a technical thing. So the CG models, so they're based on your general equilibrium models developed by Kenneth Arrow, which in turn traces to the general equilibrium models that were created by Leon Walras. So this follows in the same tradition. So think of it as a series of simultaneous mathematical equations defining the interrelationships between the entire economy. And the interrelationships are connected through the input-output tables and also the consumer utility functions and international trade. So you have all of these elements linked to each other, and the impact happens simultaneously across the entire economy. So the need is to understand what will be the impact on the entire economy. Dr. Sugandha has joined, so let me just stop for now.
Yeah. Thank you, Vishnu. Sugandha, Vishnuji has just completed his presentation. It has been a very comprehensive presentation, and they shared their research results of under what scenarios India can achieve the target of doubling its exports by 2025. So I'm sure you being a researcher and specializing in trade policy, trade related matters, I think your collaboration with NITI, particularly Vishnu and Badri team, would be very productive.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. But yeah, I would just see, I mean, how can because I could not attend the earlier presentations as I had certain classes at my institution. I hope I'll be able to add to the discussion to some extent.
Yeah.
I'll definitely try doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, you will have the privilege of watching this video subsequently. Okay. Just to summarize, if I understand the the theme of his presentation, he being in NITI Aayog, which is a think tank of the government of India, and Honorable PM has set a target of doubling exports by 2025. So they have built, a comprehensive, model, as he just explained. I'm sure he will be again explaining during the Q&A session. Under 4 scenarios, how we can achieve this target of doubling exports, and under each scenario, what will be its impact on the imports, export composition, consumption, investment, and it's a complete research model. Yes. So kindly make your presentation, and after that we will open it for questions and answers.
Sure.
Thank you.
The only issue that I'm facing right now is the camera is not well adjusted. So kindly adjust with that. But otherwise, I think I should be able to share my presentation. I'll just try doing that. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, it's very much visible. Even your camera is working. Only thing is that it's covering only your face below eyes.
Yeah. So I think the curvature is not properly set.
Okay.
I think that doesn't matter also.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So thank you everyone for inviting me to share my thoughts with all of you. So the title, as you can see here, is, I mean, I want to call it as Trade and Beyond, and essentially the idea is because we have seen that in the past few decades, the nature as well as the pattern of international trade, even the definition of international trade, has changed a lot. And that is what I would like to highlight, given given in the audience we have a lot of students, not just the economic students. So I would like to just touch upon how we used to define international trade traditionally, how that has changed over the years, and whether the policies have been able to, somehow incorporate for that changing pattern of international trade or not, or what are the few, I would say, way forwards in that regard. So that is how I've structured my presentation. So the first slide actually talks about the background of international trade, So we know that even though the first wave of globalization happened during middle, 1750s, etc., but actually trade started happening post the signing of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade only, right? And when we saw that 23 countries, a mix of both developed, even though more of developed partners were there, but a mix of both developed and developing countries signed that trade agreement, which we refer to as the GATT agreement in 1947. And the law came into effect from January 1, 1948 onwards. And that is when we started experiencing the second wave of globalization. And during this wave of globalization, trade actually grown exponentially. So even the contribution of trade to GDP, it risen, right? Now, what was so peculiar about that kind of trade? At that time, we were actually trading mostly in goods, right? Either in agricultural commodities or in manufacturing commodities. And based on the traditional trade theorems that were defined by, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Heckscher, etc., we used to believe that all the stages of production were actually undertaken domestically. So what we were trading in was only final goods. We never used to talk about trade in intermediates, etc. And therefore, even if we look at the policy regime, trade policy regime, we often used to talk about only nominal tariffs that were being imposed on commodity trade, right? We never referred to effective tariffs taken into account, the tariffs that you're imposing on imports of inputs, or the non-tariff measures, now that we refer to regulatory barriers to trade in services, etc. We never talked about that. Why? Because trade was not like that. Trade actually that was happening was essentially trade in final goods, with the dominance, of course, of the developed countries who were majorly exporting manufacturing commodities. And this type of trade, if you look at, if you go deeper into identifying the nature of this type of trade, we used to say that, trade was actually getting defined because of the technological differences between countries. Right? We referred to HO kind of trade as well, where we see that endowments of factors of production also play a very important role in determining the pattern of international trade. But the HO variety of trade, the issue with that was that we do not touch upon the technological differences there, which were very important in determining the pattern of international trade during that time. So we used to say that trade was a function of technology, not so much of that of resource differences, but technology was actually considered as a domestic economic variable, right? We never said that technology is determining trade and trade is also determining technology. No, we used to think that trade was a function of technology, and technology in turn was a function of, purchase of drawings, design, patents, etc. So that is how we formulated our theories of international trade too. And simultaneously, when we used to talk about the foreign direct investment, We used to say that, trade and FDI are actually substitutes to each other, and hence the relevance of this tariff jumping argument. We often used to consider that trading partners in the world market who are imposing a lot of barriers on their international trade, they often end up getting a lot of FDI. Why? Because the multinational companies are able to jump those tariffs by actually investing within those host economies. So that was the argument, and we have a lot of evidence in support of this argument, and hence the popularity of this tariff jumping scenario of FDI. But what has happened post 1960s 70s, the variety of international trade started changing. So what happened was, after 1960s, trade economists were not really able to figure out as to what's defining the international trade pattern. Why? Because if you look at the traditional trade theorems, when you talk about the Ricardian theorem or even the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem, these theorems, their basic premise is that there should be some difference between the countries under consideration. This difference could either be in terms of differences in their endowments of resources, differences in their labor efficiency, differences in their technologies, and so on and so forth. But that means that countries should be different to begin with to actually trade with each other. And hence, at that time, the trade that was happening was between different countries. It was not between similar countries. But post 60s, 70s, what changed was the trade, most of the trade was actually started happening between similar economies. And this trade was of the intra-industry variety. So now if you again go back to the Ricardian or Heckscher-Ohlin kind of trade, you would see that trade that was happening was of inter-industry variety. So if India is becoming a primary exporter of agricultural goods, US was becoming the primary exporter of manufacturing goods, right? So we were exporting and importing different baskets of goods and services. But post 60s and 70s, what happened was that most of the trade was actually happening within the same industry. And in the trade literature, we call that as the intra-industry trade. Trade within similar industries, but it is still trade across borders. So different countries are trading, importing, exporting both manufacturing goods. So for instance, even when you talk about a very specific category, let's say garment manufacturing, different countries are both exporting and importing garments. Why? Why is that happening? And even if that's happening, how we can reconcile the traditional trade theorems in order to prove this kind of trade that was happening in reality during that time period? Those were some of the questions that were raised, right? And of course, here there are few things that played a very important role. One, of course, countries started realizing the importance of international trade. This wave of globalization, it experienced the setup of the World Trade Organization, which did not just talk about trade in goods, but we also now talk about trade in services, trade in technology, investment. There's so many other agreements even within the ambit of the World Trade Organization. Secondly, because of this huge reduction in transportation and communication costs, this played a very important role. Third, because when prices were getting converged in the international market, after catering to inflation, etc. issues, then what became more relevant was quantity competition. And hence, when producers were thinking about their business plans, they were thinking in such a manner that even though they were trying to produce similar sort of goods or generate similar sort of services, but they wanted to introduce some degree of differentiation there. So hence the so-called concept of variety effect came into picture. Even though I'm trading in similar good, but what I am exporting is different from what I am importing, in the sense that I'm importing and exporting different varieties of the same good. And why is it so? Simply because consumers love consuming variety. And that is why we have this specific form of utility function in the microeconomics literature, which is referred to as the love for variety utility function. And that's the love for, and this is that love for variety utility function which Paul Krugman utilized in his theory in order to explain this this dominance of intra-industry trade post 1960s and 70s. One. The second point to note here is that we were no longer trading in final goods, unlike the period just before that. Now we started trading a lot in intermediate inputs. In fact, today we are trading in tasks, activities, parts, components, and whatnot. Trade in services has become a lot more dominant today. In fact, it is actually the trade in services which is triggering the total trade growth in the world market, and not the trade in merchandise. Trade in merchandise in absolute term is still, of course, very high vis-a-vis that of trade in services. But the growth in trade in services is actually triggering the world trade growth today. That is what is more important. So that's how the nature and pattern of international trade today has changed. And this is where we talk about this global value chains as well. And what do we mean by global value chains? These actually mean that no longer we are undertaking all the stages of production domestically. In fact, what holds true in reality is this fragmented production structure, where you see that even when you talk about a single commodity, it is not getting manufactured completely within a nation. Several other nations are involved in producing that single commodity. So that means that we are no longer living in the made in one country era. What we are seeing today is the made in world era. So many different countries. So for instance, even if you talk about, let's say an Apple iPod. So you would feel that, China is playing a very important role there. Of course, US is important. That's the country of origin. But still, several other countries are involved in the global value chain of that Apple iPod. And even if it is finally getting exported, let's say from China, if you look at the statistics, you would figure out that only 10% of the value addition is coming from the Chinese economy, and rest of the 90% of the value addition is from the rest of the world. So that's how trade is structured today. So that means if the pattern and nature of international trade is changing, we need to redefine our trade policies too. We cannot just stick ourselves to nominal tariffs on final goods. We cannot ignore the tariffs that we are imposing on intermediate inputs. Why? Because even if India is exporting a particular product under consideration, but it is utilizing at the same time some of the imported inputs from abroad, and the Indian government is imposing certain tariffs on that inputs, that means what? The moment you impose tariffs on your inputs, one of the theoretical consequences is that it will add to your cost of production, which in turn will show up in your prices, right? So that means that when you're defining the tariffs as a way of protecting your economy, you need to be very careful of both input tariffs and also the output tariffs. We cannot just stick ourselves to the final nominal tariffs that we are imposing. Why? Because we are no longer only trading in final goods. In fact, more than 60% of the trade that we see today is actually trade in intermediate inputs and not in final goods. And hence, a need in trade policy is also very, much required today. The next point that I want to raise here is that accordingly, when we observe that the nature and pattern of international trade was changing, the nature of the link between FDI and trade also changed. Because earlier we used to think that trade and FDI are actually substitutes for each other. You either do trade or you do FDI, but both cannot complement. But what has happened recently in the last 2.5 decades, what we have seen is that trade and FD are more of the complementary nature rather than acting as substitutes to each other. Even if you look at the international trade statistics, out of that 60% of the trade that's happening in intermediate inputs, majority of the trade is happening through subsidiaries of similar firms. And what are these subsidiaries of similar firms? That means, in a way, we are talking about MNCs, multinational corporations, or in general foreign direct investment. So FDI, instead of acting as a substitute to trade, it actually acts as a complementary to trade today. So if I have an MNC, let's say from the United States of America, the parent country is the United States of America, and it's opening up its subsidiary in India, right? And it is actually producing a product which is getting exported to the rest of the world from India. What does that mean? That by allowing more of FDI, I'm able to increase my exports. So instead of FDI acting as a substitute to trade, it is actually complementing my international trade today. And I would not just focus on exports. When we talk about trade, it is not just about exports. Trade means sum of both exports and imports, and therefore imports are equally important. Especially today, when we are trading via global value chains, we can never ignore our imports. Even if you're going to touch the export side of your economy, you would ultimately see that even the import side will get affected. And therefore, it would be wrong if I just draw a linkage between FDI and exports. At the same time, it is also likely that even though the MNC has set up its sister concern, its subsidiary in the Indian economy, but some of its input requirements are not being met domestically. So in that case, that FDI firm will also import some other inputs from abroad. It will then utilize along with, Indian value addition, along with that imports, and finally prepare the final exportable commodity which is just going to export from India to the rest of the world. So that means that FDI cannot just turn out to be complementary to your exports, it can also turn out to be complementary to your imports and hence to international trade altogether. So that's how we see the changing base for FDI today. And some of the policies, if you look today, the government of India is also inviting a lot of investors to invest within the Indian economy, because we have realized that we have realized that these investors are going to invest in Indian resources. They will utilize our resources given the regulatory requirements, and ultimately it will help us in improving the economic growth of our country. So that's the changing base of international trade, the linkage between international trade and FDI, which is driving the total world trade today. And this diagram, it's a very simple scatter plot. What I've done is I've taken data on just two variables from the World Bank's World Development Indicators. I would not say that it's the part of the research project that I'm presently working on. No, I just, happened to look at this data and I thought of plotting the link, a simple link between the two. So I know that there are a lot of the factors that impact the contribution of trade to a country's GDP. Lot many factors also impact our FDI inflows, but I just wanted to look at the simple association between the two. So what I did, I plotted trade on the vertical axis and I have net FDI inflows as a proportion of GDP on the horizontal axis, and we have these more than 200 countries that are representing these different scatter plots here. And if you look at the direction in which these scatter plots are moving, so it is clearly visible from this red dotted line that there exists a positive and a significant association between the two. So what does that mean? The trade and FDI in general, and I'm not just referring to India, I'm looking at the world trade and world FDI data. Trade and FDI in general are actually positively associated to each other. First point. The second point that I would like to highlight here is, and this is actually coming from your basic courses on econometrics. So when you plot this is a simple linear regression when you're regressing trade on FDI, right? And this dotted line is what it tells you about the average beta coefficient, how it proceeds. Now what happens is this is the predicted line, right? And these scatter plots, these blue scatter plots or black big scatter plots where I've highlighted some of the India's comparators, these are original data points, right? So now if you look at the position of India is actually, performing below its potential. What does that mean? That it means that India still has the capacity or the ability to utilize its FDI in order to achieve its trade target, right? So even if we are setting a lot of targets for us, we are defining our vision for the year 2047 when India will turn, 100 years old, then we could probably think of taking better advantage of our FDI or trade reform to reach this potential level. So the positive point here is that we still have that, you know, underutilized potential, which we can think of utilizing in order to improve our performance in the world trading platform. So these are the two key takeaways from this slide on trade and FDI linkages. Now what's next? The nature of trade and FDI has changed over the years. It is actually redefined the nexus between trade, technology, and FDI, right? And why am I saying that? Because I know that now it is not just that technological differences are defining our trade patterns. In fact, trade also define our access to technology. You know, now there exists a bi-directional causality between the two. So when we were talking about the pre-1960s, 70s era, we said that it is a technology that was deriving our international trade today. But now, at that time, but now what we're saying is that no, that's actually a partially correct statement. Why? Because what we see today is the mix of both. You know, what we see today is the bi-directional causality between trade and technology. So technology is determining trade, trade is determining technology, and so on. And one, you know, straightforward example here is when you talk about FDI, because FDI is what? It is nothing but the composite of both trade and technology. You're talking about both trade in goods or trade in services or trade in technology. That is what we're doing via foreign direct investment today, right? And we have seen that, you know, a lot of emerging market economies, developing countries, unlike their earlier attitude, now they're willing to invite a lot of foreign direct inflows within their economy. That's how the atmosphere, the world trading atmosphere has changed. And in fact, when you look at how GATS, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, determine 4 different ways via which you can supply services, the third way, that is mode 3, it is actually about FDI. So mode 3 is what? It is about commercial presence. And when you're saying commercial presence, that means a service provider, if it wants to supply its services to residents in the other country, he or she has to set up its establishment commercially in that country. And what does that mean? In other words, we're talking about FDI. So FDI is not only inherently linked to trade in goods, it is actually linked to trade in services as well. So trade in goods, trade in services, trade in technology, trade in investment, all of them are so much related to each other today that you cannot think of, you know, I would say achieving targets in any one of them without completely neglecting the other category. So for instance, what I've written here is that even if you're going to have, you know, a low tariff regime, and when I'm talking about tariff, I'm essentially talking about trade in goods. In case of services, there are no tariffs. We always talk about behind the border regulations in case of services, right? So in case of trade in goods, where we talk about tariffs, even when we reduce our tariffs to, you know, to liberalize our international trading policies, then also at the same time, if you're going to follow stricter FDI norms, sorry, that in itself might become as a regulatory restriction on our international trade. Why? Because trade in goods is so much linked to trade in investment or FDI today that you cannot think of achieving one without completely restricting the other. Just give me a moment. Okay, so the other issue here is about the increasing role of services, because what we have seen today that, like, you know, so much investment into transportation and communication sector, it actually provided a boost. 1 minute. Yeah, so what we have talked about is about trade in goods, but we did not really focus a lot on services. Now, why are services important? One point I've already raised, that services today actually is services trade growth is actually contributing towards majority of the world trade today, right? This we have already seen and discussed. But at the same time, even in manufacturing sector, these services are playing a very important role. Why? I'm sorry. Brahma sir, can I please take a 1-minute break? Because I think that's issue,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
otherwise it's going to link.
I was about to suggest that.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, I'm very sorry for that. So, what I was trying to highlight in this slide is that, another issue that we need to keep in mind is about the increasing role of services and also specifically the services trade today. Why is that important? Because that of course we have seen that services trade has grown a lot in the past few decades, and in fact, even during the corona outbreak we could see that even though the entire global trade plummeted, but still trade in services was very much there, right? Because of the way in which we define trade in services, that actually holds a very important role. At least the mode 1 services trade was pretty much relevant during the COVID crisis as well, right? Now, what actually triggered this services trade growth? If you go back to the first and second industrial revolution, that first and second industrial revolution, it actually reduced the transportation cost drastically, which in turn helped the manufacturing kind of trade to grow, or merchandise kind of trade to grow. But from the third industrial revolution onwards, what we have seen is the investment in information technology. Today, like we see that we pay negligible cost for accessing internet services, right? So internet, right? So that investment in digital technology actually expanded or provided a boost to trade and services altogether, then which is what we are experiencing today. First thing. The second thing is that nowadays services are increasingly utilized even within manufacturing processes, and that is what is referred to as the phenomena of servicification or servitization in general. Now, what does that imply? That essentially implies that even when you're exporting goods, you are not just exporting a commodity, you're actually also exporting your services that are embedded in that commodity, right? So that means that even if you are importing some of these services from abroad, which you are ultimately utilizing in producing your manufacturing commodity, and which you are ultimately exporting to the rest of the world. So it is not just trade in goods, but also trade in services that actually becomes very important. So the link, the comprehensive link that we now need to, incorporate within our policy thinking also is this link between trade in goods, services, investment, and hence technology. And therefore, any negotiation that we talk about, You know, even if we see nowadays, if we look at the newer RTAs that even India is signing, we are not just talking about goods. We talk about both goods, services, as well as investment, because that has now become the new trade regime. And this is how we define international trade today. So that means trade today is completely different from the trade that we experienced prior to 1960s, 70s, or even during 1960s, 70s. Now, the other question is that do we see any sort of policy coherence in that regard? Well, of course, the all the agencies have been trying to align that, but the issue is that even when you consider looking at the Indian economy, even though there exists smooth interactions between different departments, but still we have different departments for all these categories, right? We have a different department which looks after industry. We have a different department which looks after services. We have a different department which looks after manufacturing trade. We have a different department which looks after services trade. You know, there is a different desk altogether. We have a different department which looks after FDI policies. So what does that mean? That till today, you know, that complete policy coherence is still missing. And I would not say that that's specific to India. In fact, that is what we see at the WTO also. At WTO as well, there is no comprehensive multilateral agreement that talks about trade in goods, services, investment together. No, we have different components of WTO catering to different, types of trade. And that is one reason, as to why countries are resorting to regional trade agreements. One reason as to why we see that there has been an exponential increase in the RTAs even after the establishment of WTO was this linkage between different components of trade. Because when you are going for such a negotiation, you do not just have to restrict yourself to only trade in goods, only trade in services. You can actually negotiate all these components of international trade with your trading partner in one go, within one agreement. And that's another relevance of regional trade agreements. So this is where policies, I guess, need to take care of this growing interlinkage, growing association between goods, services, investment, and technology trade. So here are some lessons or unanswered questions that I would just like to flag to and this is where I end. I just have one more slide after that. First is the something that I've already raised, that we have seen that international trade nature and pattern, in fact the geography of international trade has changed drastically. And therefore, when we are rethinking about policies, we need to tweak our policies accordingly, right? It is very important to recognize the interlinkages between trade and FDI, and even more important to recognize this fact that trade is not just about exports, it is also about imports. If you are importing a lot today, but if these imports are quality rich imports, which in turn help you in improving the competitiveness of your export sector. So even though today, in layman terms, your current account deficit will increase, but tomorrow when you will be able to reap the benefits of importing that high quality inputs from abroad, you will current account deficit will in turn improve. It will actually decrease. So we need to have a long term, or at least the medium term perspective in our mind. We should not be very much short sighted. The second point is that even when we talk about foreign trade policy, what we have realized in the recent past, that there is lot about exports, and we talk very little about imports. But that should not be the approach. The way trade has changed today, the way in which, or the manner in which we are talking about the so-called global value chains, where it is not just about exports, not just about imports, but also but about both exports, imports, FDI, etc. We need to focus on all the elements of international trade. And as I've already pointed out through my simple slide on trade and FDI linkages, even if you try to protect, or let's say if you try to impose stricter FDI regulations, and at the same time you're aiming for higher trade targets, that might not be possible, just because trade and FDI go hand in hand with each other. They're actually two sides of the same coin. So you have to take them together, right? And similarly, it is important that we align our trade policies vis-a-vis that of our industrial, we need to keep in mind our industrial structure too. So for instance, we know that in our country, MSMEs are very, very important. We consider them as potential export powerhouses. They're contributing a lot to our GDP, around 30%, I guess. They're contributing a lot to our exports. But do we have good enough policies for MSMEs? Are new policies that are getting defined, they're catering to the needs of the MSMEs? That is another question that we need to figure out. Similarly, when we have realized that today we are talking about the mix of digitalization and globalization, are our MSMEs getting digital to somehow survive in that growing competitive environment in the world market? These are some of the questions that we need to address while redefining our trade policies. And one last slide on why India is becoming very, very important today, and the reason that I'm going to pose here is completely, off the trade, I would say, and hence the title of my slide is Trade and Beyond. So what I am showing here is, I'm just looking at the population statistics, and more specifically, I'm looking at the working age population, the so-called demographics of India and its comparator economies. And what we see here is, except for India, even in case of China, the working age population percentage is declining. In India, which is shown by this blue line, it is still rising. And that is why India matters a lot, because in the presence of poor demographics, even if you have access to new technology every day, but who's going to consume that good? There's no one on the consumption side. You have a production side, you have a consumption side. On the production side, you have both capital and labor. With increasing technology, you can still, capital can still substitute labor. But when you come on the consumption side, I'm using simple economics here. When you come on the consumption side, there is no capital to substitute for labor. You still need people to consume that product, right? And that is where India becomes very important. That is why you see that a lot of developed countries today are actually interested in investing in India. And this is where I close. Thank you. And I'm sorry for the disturbance in between.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation, Sugandha.
Thank you so much, sir.
You gave us, a complete, I would say, a historical perspective to the nature of trade, beginning from early 50s to till date. Okay, we will take some questions from students' side. First, I would like to, invite our first speaker, Vishnu Gupta ji,
Sure.
Vishnu Dasgupta ji. As you know, he has already been here for last 1.5 hours. Vishnu ji, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think you have some other immediate commitments with regard to your today's engagement. Okay, so I hope you also enjoyed her presentation, Vishnu ji.
Yeah, it was nice. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So we will be taking a few questions from the student side with regard to the presentation made by Vishnu ji from NITI Aayog. I also have a set of questions, but before I ask, I would like students to take the opportunity. Please raise your hands. Those who wish to pose a question to the presentation made by Vishnu ji, please raise your hands. I'll give the chance one after the other. Yes. Mahek, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay. So, is there any technical problem in people asking or raising their hand?
I don't think so, sir. Sir, Krishna Kumar sir has already posted a question in the chat box. Should
Okay. Yeah. So he can speak. Actually, he can switch on his mic and speak.
Sugandha, the question was technically to you. Anyway, I'm just repeating the same question which you have written there. See, this is posed in the context of the graph which you had shown, which also ratifies the question, because technically you were saying that the country is having a net foreign direct investment GDP ratio, And the similar other countries are having higher trade to GDP ratios. So this suddenly, when you said that, I remembered about the Nokia story, where suddenly there's a huge FDI which occurs in Tamil Nadu, and when the factory closes and goes up, there is nothing of the same which remains, because an FDI coming, having no sort of forward and backward linkages with the economy, has also got to do with the state of infrastructure or state of supporting facilities which are there in the country, which alone would be able to harness industrial growth. So in the context of this number of European economies, also number of economies in East Asia, going ahead with new industrial policies, I thought might be not just you, Vishnu, our other guest, Dr. Vishnu, could also respond on it, because he's also from NITI Aayog. And also, it was very nice hearing both of you. It's a question posed, of course, to both of you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
I think, it's a meeting of all, three Bhagwans. We have Vishnu, Badriji is not there, and Krishna ji and myself, and adding to it. So Vishnuji, Krishna Kumar is our, trade, teacher. He teaches international trade.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, definitely he would take up that question. From the student side, yes, please. I don't see any hands rising. I don't know whether you have fully understood or the other way around. Okay. If you have no questions to ask, my questions to Vishnuji is, he being in the think tank, NITI Aayog, in the last for a few years, Rajiv Kumar ji has done excellent work of lifting up NITI Aayog's reputation. Vishnuji, my question is, why SAGs have failed in India in living up to their expectations? Vis-a-vis China, SEG, special economic zones. Why, for me, if I see the target set for them and their actual, performance, it's not up to the mark vis-a-vis China. Whereas China's SEG policy is considered to be, a benchmark with regard to its export performance. This is my first question to you.
Why SEZs have not performed to the extent they have in China?
Yes.
That's an interesting question. The answer, however, cannot be as straightforward as the question.
Okay.
Let me try.
Okay.
So there was a report by committee chaired by Baba Kalyani that looked at the same issue. I think a copy of the report is available online. You can have a look at it, have a read if you're interested in knowing more. But SEZs in India, in some sense, were structured a bit differently from those in China. I think SEZs in India are of a much smaller scale than in China. So although they received various benefits, many of the other issues like our logistics issues, our infrastructure issues hampered the growth of SEZs. And SEZs, they could not attract manufacturing to the same extent they could attract services. So there are also various issues for that. So those are some of the areas where SEZs, some of the reasons why SEZs probably may not have grown to the extent they have grown in China. One of them, I think, is the SEZs are not as big as they are in China. Second, the SEZs coincided with a slowdown in global trade. So that also happened. For various reasons, they were unable to attract investment in manufacturing to the same extent they could attract in services. I think SEZs in India, they also had to fulfill some export obligations, which they couldn't. So these are some of the reasons why SEZs have not grown to the same extent they have in China.
Yeah, thank you. If I recollect, one of the view expressed by experts that while we made this SEZ policy, probably states were not, duly consulted, and the role of states has been limited till date. And after all, SEGs have to be located in a particular state, where, as you mentioned, in the logistic and other, ease of doing business, and provision of basic infrastructure by the state governments, the role of states have been not up to the mark. This has been cited as one of the reasons why SEGs have not taken off well.
So the current budget takes that into account. They made the announcement where the SEZ Act will be modified in concordance and in consultation with the states. That is something that has already been announced and is currently in the works. So another thing is the SEZs were challenged in the WTO. So the SEZs are also currently being evaluated in light of that, and they are trying to make them more robust and resilient.
Okay. And what do you expect would be the major changes in the new trade policy that we are expecting, in the next few months?
Well, I can't comment on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But they are looking at changing it. I think so they're looking at changing it. So they're working on it, and let's see it. Let's see the new policy soon.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, if there are no other questions, yes. Krishna Kumarji has asked one question. Is the chat box chart? Yeah. Okay, there are a few questions here. One is by Pragya Shankar, my colleague from other college. Currently, global scenario, shifting geopolitics and importance of strategic sectors. How should this shape trade policy?
Should I?
So
is it when like who is it addressed to?
it's not mentioned to whom it is addressed to, but either of you or both of you can try to answer.
I mean, I'll like if Ms. Sugandha has something she can say, then I can add.
Please see the chat box. There are a few questions here I notice now.
Well, I mean, I would not like to comment upon the politics. Rather, I would stick to economics. I don't think so. I still have the expertise in commenting on the politics. But yes, I do feel, So, for instance, a very simple example here is the growing number of RTAs. I would again refer to that. Not RTAs, actually free trade agreements, SEPA, SECAs that we are observing today. Essentially, when we look at the theory of RTAs, one of the oldest theory is about the natural trading partner. So it says that you end up forming an agreement with a country with whom you're already trading a lot, and it actually completely ignores the notion of geopolitics, etc. But today, when we look at the formation of trade agreements, it is not just about the economics, it is not just the economics of RTAs. We are actually looking at the politics of RTAs because, security related concerns and other, global security, rather, I would say related concerns matter a lot. And that's how we see that not only we are signing RTAs with our trading partners from whom we can gain a lot in terms of international trade today, but also if we can somehow increase or somehow protect our economies from what's happening in the world market today, if that is also, if that is also getting catered to by signing these trade agreements, you're willing to do that as well. So I think that is one specific example which actually, correctly support the statement that you've written. How should this shape trade policy? Well, this is already shaping trade policy. As I said, that RTA is actually a policy instrument. So we have already seen that that's shaping our trade policy today. So if you look at only the economics, we never talk about politics when we talk about economics. If you go to the economic theories or even the empirical literature, you will always see policy recommendation towards the end, but we never talk about that otherwise while formulating the models. I would say the only policy instrument that we incorporate while formulating models of trade theory is about regulatory barriers, and we define regulatory barriers in terms of tariffs or other non-tariff measures. Even the regulatory barriers, other regulatory barriers to trade that impede our services trade. So that would be my optimal response to this question. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And there is a question by Haripriya Muralidhar. Most of the trade policies regulated by WTO have an orientation towards the profit of the Western MNCs, ignoring the development of other nations So do you think WTO can be a platform to regulate international trade? So
it's a platform that sets the rules and regulations governing international trade. There are a series of arguments that does that. You have the GATT 1994, you have the GATT's General Agreement on Trade and Services, you have the Agreement on Intellectual Property on Investment, Agreement on Anti-Dumping, Subsidies, Countervailing Measures, Agreement on Investment. So in some sense, the WTO sets the common rules with respect to international trade. And even the RTAs with which Ms. Sugandha was talking about are always either WTO plus, that is they build on the commitments of the WTO, or WTO extra, as in they cover rules that are beyond the WTO. So in some sense, the WTO has already set some common rules governing international trade.
yes. The next question is by Anumati Charan Teja. Who decides trade policy in India?
That's an interesting question. The foreign trade policy in India and trade policy as such comes under the ambit of the Department of Commerce. But the customs duties are ultimately decided by the Department of Revenue. The current ROTTEP scheme is currently handled by the Department of Revenue. And the Department of Revenue also has a duty drawback scheme. So although the Department of Commerce decides on the trade policy of India, and DGFT within the Department of Commerce develops the foreign trade policy of India, the Department of Revenue customs rather, solely because of its role, also to notifies many rules and regulations with respect to international trade.
Yes, I think that's the perfect answer to, okay. So I think we don't have any further questions. Would you like to take up Krishna Kumar's, the first question he raised? That is,
don't you think that like in different European economies, they should have new industrial policies?
Yes.
We already have some new policies. We have the production-linked incentive scheme. They are coming out with a new SSE policy. We also have the National Industrial Corridor Development Trust, the NICTED, which are developing industrial corridors across the country. I think the previous budget announced the mega industrial textile parks. So the government of India is coming out with new policies to encourage industrial growth.
In fact, if I have to add, I think in the recent budget, there is a proposal to identify, set up district industrial, hubs, identifying certain districts.
There's also one district, one product district.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's happening.
Yes. Yes, I think the production linked incentive scheme is the, one which is taking off very well. And the government is expanding the number of industries that are being covered. I think initially it was for 3 to 4 industries only. Now today I think it covers around 12 industries or so. And the amount of financial.
Started off with 3, then there was an addition of 10. On
10.
the top of that, something for semiconductor has also happened.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Any further questions? It would be nice, if you all those who have a question to switch on the mic and ask directly to the speakers, one of the two speakers.
Good morning, sir. My question is, can current trade wars...
Please introduce yourself. Who is this?
This is Anjali.
Anjali, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. My question is, can current trade wars lead to global economic crisis?
Whom you are asking this question?
Vishnu, sir.
Vishnu, sir. Okay.
Can current trade wars lead to global economic crisis? Well, a constant increase in tariffs and increased and a possible increase in tensions between the countries may have an impact on trade and economic growth. So in some sense, yes, but I mean, I can't go into details and specifics because this is a very complicated question.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, Mahek.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Are you proposing vote of thanks?
Okay, sir. Just a second.
Yes, please.
So thank you to Vishnu sir and Sugandha ma'am for taking out the time and conducting this insightful session for all of us. I am sure this helped us gain a better understanding of international trade and related concepts. I would also like to thank Brahma Reddy sir and all the associated people of Economics Association for help in the conduction of this event. And thank you to all the people present here. Once again, thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Economics Association, Department of Economics, my thanks to both Vishnuji and Sugandha for taking time out of their very busy schedule. And Vishnuji's presentation is all about how to reach the target of doubling exports by 2025. I think they have used a massive model which has all the elements, which will help us, better predict the whether we can achieve under various scenarios. Interestingly, I think under all 4 scenarios we are going to achieve the target. Is that right?
There are 4 different scenarios that were considered. And
yes.
It shows what would be the impact on the economy if
yes.
exports would have. Another way of looking at it is these components need to grow by this much to allow for the doubling of exports. So you can look at it that also.
Yes. So that was something new. For the first time I have listened to. Thank you also to Sugandha for giving us an overview of the changing nature of the trade, where she mentioned that the nature of trade, in the early 50s was between inter-industry, between 2 completely different industries, which has changed over time to intra-industry, and now the role of FDI. How the linkage between FDI and net exports, which through her simple scatter plot, it reveals us that a net FDI has a positive impact on the net exports. Further, her findings in fact supports India's FDI policy. Way back in 1991, when we began economic liberalization, a lot of restrictions existed on FDI. But today, if you see the FDI latest notification by the Department of Commerce, almost in all sectors, we are permitting FDI. Not only just we are permitting, in most of the sectors, the level of FDI permitted is more than 50%. So there is only just a few negative list of sectors where FDI is not permitted. Even in defense, we are permitting FDI, including insurance sector and so on. I think that supports the argument that that less is the restriction and FDI, better would be for trade. Thank you very much once again, Sugandha, for joining with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.